Imagine waking up to find an official HOA notice taped to your door, demanding you move your boat, because it was causing ripples on the lake. At first, it sounds absurd. But behind this ridiculous demand hid a much bigger storm brewing between one homeowner and an arrogant HOA board. What the HOA didn't know, however, was that they'd just picked a fight with the wrong person, and soon, their so-called authority would sink like a stone. Jake stood frozen on his porch, staring at the bright orange HOA notice stuck to his door. His fingers traced the bold black letters as his mind tried to process what he was reading. The letter accused him of violating community harmony and demanded he remove his boat immediately because, according to the board, it was causing ripples on the lake and disturbing other residents. At first, Jake thought it had to be some kind of joke. A prank. A mistake. But as he read the entire letter, it became clear, the HOA was dead serious. What the board didn't know, though, was that Jake had a secret. A big one. The lake didn't belong to the HOA at all. It belonged to him. When Jake purchased his property 5 years earlier, he didn't just buy the cabin and the land around it, he bought the entire stretch of water. His deed spelled it out clearly, every drop, every ripple, every fish beneath the surface was his legal property. But the HOA either hadn't checked, or they didn't care. Jake wasn't the kind of man to start trouble, but he wasn't one to back down either. He spent years restoring that boat with his late father, sanding down its hull and polishing every inch until it gleamed. To him, the boat wasn't just transportation, it was memory, it was freedom, it was his last connection to the man who taught him to fish when he was a boy. There was no way he was moving it. Still, Jake didn't want to fight, yet. Instead of responding right away, he calmly folded the letter, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and decided to gather every piece of evidence he could. If the HOA wanted a war, he was going to make sure he had the facts, and the law, on his side. He pulled out the original property deed, tax records, and lake ownership documents, stacking them neatly on his kitchen table. As he did, a small, knowing smile crept across his face. Because what the HOA didn't realize was simple, they were trespassing on his lake, and he had the power to turn the tables. 2 days later, Jake returned home from work to find 3 HOA board members standing near his dock, clipboards in hand, pointing at his boat like crime scene investigators. One of them, a woman named Karen, the self-appointed president of the HOA, walked up with a smug smile plastered across her face. "Mr. Lawson," she began, tilting her sunglasses down. "We've given you a formal warning. That boat violates HOA guidelines, and if you don't move it immediately, we'll fine you $500 per day until it's gone." Jake stayed calm, his expression unreadable. He knew arguing now would be pointless. Karen and her board thought they had all the power. What they didn't realize was that they were standing on his private property, making threats they had no authority to enforce. Instead of responding, Jake simply said, "I'll handle it," and walked away. But behind closed doors, he was already putting a plan into motion. That night, he spread out his property documents across the kitchen table, highlighting every line that confirmed his ownership of the lake. Not just the shoreline. Not just a section of water. The entire lake was his, and the HOA had zero jurisdiction over it. But Jake wasn't just going to prove them wrong. No, he was going to make an example out of them. The next morning, he contacted a local attorney who specialized in property rights and trespassing laws. After reviewing Jake's deed, the lawyer laughed. "They're threatening you over ripples on your lake. This is going to be fun." Over the next few days, Jake gathered photo evidence of the HOA board members walking on his dock, measuring his boat, and even setting foot in the shallow water. Every step they took, every picture they snapped, every threat they made, he documented it all. Because soon, Jake wasn't going to just defend himself. He was going to flip the script entirely. And when he was done, the HOA wouldn't just stop bothering him, they'd wish they'd never come near his property in the first place. The trap was set. The board had no idea what was coming. 3 weeks later, the HOA scheduled a mandatory compliance meeting, summoning Jake to explain his refusal to move the boat. They were confident he'd cave under pressure. But Jake had no intention of defending himself. Instead, he was about to go on the offensive. Jake walked into the meeting carrying a sleek black folder, every document neatly organized inside. Karen, the HOA president, sat at the head of the table, surrounded by 5 other board members, all wearing smug, self-satisfied expressions. "Mr. Lawson," Karen began, tapping her pen, "we're here to discuss your ongoing violations and the fines you now owe, totaling $3,500. Jake calmly set the folder on the table, opened it, and slid a single document across to her. "Actually," he said evenly, "this meeting isn't about my boat. It's about your trespassing." Karen frowned, confused, as Jake's attorney, who had silently walked in behind him, spoke up. "According to county property records, Mr. Lawson owns the entire lake, the dock, and all water rights. That means every time you or your board members set foot on his property, you were trespassing. And we have video evidence." The room fell silent. Karen glanced nervously at the other board members, but Jake wasn't finished. He pulled out another document, this one an official trespassing fine notice drafted by his lawyer. "As of today," Jake said calmly, "each of you owes me $2,000 per incident for unauthorized entry onto private property. I've counted 7 documented violations so far." The smug expressions vanished. One board member's jaw literally dropped. Another whispered under his breath, "He owns the lake." Jake leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but firm. "You wanted to fine me for ripples. I'm fining you for trespass. And if you refuse to pay, I'll see you in court, where I guarantee you'll lose." The HOA board was stunned into silence. For the first time, Karen had no snarky comeback. Jake gathered his documents, stood up, and walked out, leaving behind a room full of pale, speechless faces. The power dynamic had shifted completely 2 weeks after Jake's confrontation with the HOA board. Silence swept through the neighborhood. The constant letters, the threats, the fines. All of it stopped overnight. But Jake wasn't done yet. His lawyer had officially filed the trespassing fines with the county clerk, and the HOA now had a deadline, either pay up or face a lawsuit. At first, the board tried to fight back. They hired their own attorney, hoping to intimidate Jake into backing down. But when their lawyer reviewed the property deeds and video evidence, he gave them a harsh reality check. They didn't have a case. The lake was Jake's private property. Every dock plank, every inch of water, every single ripple belonged to him, and their threats were legally meaningless. Faced with an unwinnable battle, the HOA had no choice but to settle. Within a month, Jake received a formal apology letter along with a check for $14,000 covering the trespassing fines and his legal fees. The once arrogant board members were humiliated, and Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, quietly resigned from her position. Jake's neighbors, many of whom had been quietly frustrated with the HOA for years, started showing up at his door just to thank him. For the first time in a long time, the community felt free. No more ridiculous letters. No more power plays. And Jake's boat? It stayed exactly where it was, resting proudly on his lake, untouched and untouchable. But Jake didn't stop there. He filed a formal complaint with the county, demanding an investigation into the HOA's overreach and misuse of authority. That investigation is still ongoing, and let's just say, the board may be facing even bigger problems in the future. In the end, Jake proved something powerful. Sometimes the HOA isn't as untouchable as they think. When you know your rights, and you're willing to fight for them, you can turn the tables in ways they never see coming. If you've ever faced an HOA nightmare like this, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more shocking, unbelievable HOA case files. Because trust me, we've only scratched the surface.